Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. If I may make a request before we start the show, if you could give me a rating, just a review, you don't have to follow me for the rest of your life, just something, so that we can keep building on the momentum, keep getting good guests in, and keep the conversation going. I would really appreciate it. Now, my guest tonight is a teacher, she's a union head, and she is committed to our students, to our teachers, to keeping everything going in the best way possible. Very difficult times for everyone, and I'm very pleased that I got to sit down with her. Let's get to it. Without further ado, the woman, the myth, the legend, and Katzburg. Thank you for coming, Ann. How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully. The closer you can get to that mic, by the way, the better. Feel free to get comfortable. You can even pull it a little bit closer if need be.
Okay.
But I think there we go. Perfect. There we go. Excellent. So, how's the matcha?
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's wonderful.
It's warm. It's kind of sweet. It just hits the spot.
Yeah.
Delicious.
I got that citrus ginger honey blend from Costco. So if you want to pick some up for yourself, treat yourself right.
I love the tip.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm going to need the recipe.
Yeah, no problem. So here we are, right? We're mid-October, and we're trying to struggle through, the COVID situation. We're trying to struggle through the state always changing the regulations. How, may I ask, are you keeping your sanity?
Well, we've been doing this struggle for quite some time now, so I feel that it's been nonstop. When we went to shelter in place on March 13th, I started right away doing a crisis negotiations because our contract didn't apply for the pandemic. So there was a lot of things that happened right away, and it was exhausting. We worked throughout the summer, and we really haven't stopped. It's a 24/7, job. It's just ongoing. And how do I keep myself sane? I feel fortunate. I feel really lucky because I have the most incredible teachers, educators, pretty much in the state of California. And they are true warriors in the sense that they're stepping up and they're doing a fantastic job. So for me, that gives me a lot of hope, and I get a lot of joy just from knowing that they're serving our children. And I wish that I was still in the classroom so I could see our students. I don't get that privilege anymore, but I do know that the letters that I'm receiving and the information I'm getting is that our students are thriving. So that makes me feel good. In some cases, I think there's lots of struggles too. So that's one thing. I have a lot of wonderful people that I'm working with. I have my October rep council meeting, which I do once a month. All the sites have reps that support our staff. And so I was just looking at, on the Zoom call, I was looking at all the faces of our reps, and it was just like, I love them all. They're just great people. And so that gives me a lot of courage and the ability to just continue on, knowing that we all have to work together to do the very best that we can. And I think that management is, people that are from the district office that are working really hard too are trying to do their best job. And it takes a community to really pull through a pandemic. And my goal is to try to do it as successfully as possible, knowing that this is new territory. None of us ever lived through this kind of a situation. So I have aspirations as a leader to do the best that I can. And, and I work hard, but I do take good care of myself. sleep well, eat well, exercise, do all that. So
God, I would love the sleep well part. My little kids wake up early. I mean, it's like 6 a.m. and they're just running around and playing. They've now started going into each other's room at like 6:15 to play marbles. And we're like, what are you doing? And then naturally the iron is they come out saying they lost one. And that's the only chuckle I get at 6:30 in the morning. I'm like, you lost your marbles.
You lost your marbles.
And you're waking me up to find your marbles. Like,
that's hysterical.
Yeah.
You know what? You're lucky. You're lucky that they are playing with each other and that they have each other. It goes by really fast. I have 2 kids of my own. They went through this district, and they don't live with me. I have one in Copenhagen and one that lives in Boulder. So,
wow. Yeah, it's a lot. So, working through these issues, right? Because that's what everybody's trying to do. And I think the parent community, the management, the teacher community, everybody's working. It does seem, though, there's a bit, it's almost like everybody's gears are spinning, but we're all misaligned, or we're slightly misaligned. And it's really hard to get kind of people on the same page and understand who's doing what. And, like everybody always says, hey, look, we're working towards a solution. And the question immediately after that is like, wait, who's working? And what are they working? There was this, I think the Bell schedule came out yesterday, and there was this whole post on social media about like the robust changes. And that was the word. Everybody kept putting robust in quotes. And I was dying because they were doing it so well, and it was so funny. They're like, they moved lunch 10 minutes earlier, like such robust progress. So people are working really hard, but it doesn't seem like everybody's pulling the rope in the same direction. What do you think's attributing to this kind of grand effort on all sides, but misalignment?
Well, I wanted you to know that when it comes to the process that we're dealing with, I feel like I'm on a treadmill and I'm running nowhere. It's fast. And decisions are made, and then all of a sudden it's like we have to have answers, and often we don't. I think that the most difficult thing for me as an educator, and I've felt this my whole career, is that being in the trenches, we're the ones that are working with students. We are the ones that are seeing what is being delivered. We know the problems. We know the successes. I really feel that it's important that we're included in the decision-making process. And how it has been happening, and you've seen it if you've been watching our school board meetings, that the trustees are getting some information. And it is the responsibility of upper management to provide all of that information. This is what's happening with our health. I mean, coronavirus is a novel virus. Novel means we just don't know what it's going to do, right? And so a decision could be made, and then it changes because you get more information. And that happened throughout the summer. We had a decision that was made regarding returning to school on June 23rd. And at that time, every student was going to be able to come back. And then come July, we had so many cases of coronavirus that had just, took a turn for the worse in California. The governor had to pull back. And so that's why we went to remote learning. So I had anticipated, and this was my vision of how we would succeed with the pandemic, is after we went to shelter in place, and, it was a flip of a light pretty much. Friday, March 13th, at 4 o'clock, I think the decision was made that we were going to close schools. That meant that nobody could come back. So none of us were prepared. I couldn't say to the teachers, pack up your rooms, take home your materials, bring the things in because we got to do it. And then we didn't have the materials to instruct. And then at that time, we were so worried about how we were going to deliver to the students the education that they needed at that time, and we were worried about their success, and so we didn't go to grades, and there's all these things that happened. So during that time, I was beginning to think about planning, and I love to plan, okay, and I love structure, and so I always have year-long plans of what we're going to do, and I have everything in place, and I did it as a teacher. I knew exactly what I was going to teach, pretty much every day, but over the course of a year. And that's what we do. We plan. So I looked into the summer and I thought, well, how can we bring the voices of all the different stakeholders together from our bargaining unit, which is, teachers, psychologists, nurses, social workers, counselors, teacher librarians, all of us together to provide the insight that we need in order to open successfully. And so we started these 4 fabulous groups, and we did it with management, and then there were other bargaining units that were involved. So we had SEIU and CSEA, the bus drivers, office managers, the food services, everybody working together. And we divided it up into curriculum and instruction, to logistics, testing, and then we focused also, assessments was testing, and we focused also on social emotional learning. Knowing that logistics needed to be figured out first, and then also, of course, the curriculum to kind of align with that. And those were great meetings. And I felt at that time that we weren't struggling. We really, truly were coming together. It was collaborative. And we had a pathway. We were looking at hybrid and what we could do to bring back our students so that we knew social distancing was important even at that time. But we didn't look into a just strictly remote learning situation. So we spent all this time, and then June 23rd, when the decision was made to go back, those plans went to the wayside. And then we had to come up with a new idea of what it was going to be like. But at that time, when Superintendent Schmidt was the superintendent, he had everybody who had been working really hard at the management level take about 10 days of a break. And at that time, for me, I still had my folks working. And so I was frustrated because I knew we needed to get everybody set, because as a classroom teacher, I wanted to give them time to plan and develop the curriculum so that you can make sure that the things we needed to do would be able to fit into this new hybrid kind of situation. Well, that didn't happen. And then in the middle of July, when the decisions were made by the trustees on the July 14th to do the hybrid, and then July 16th to teach remotely, to go back just to pure remote, that was when we had to start doing the negotiations. And so all these different scenarios that are happening in a kind of a chaotic fashion, which we have no control over, is tough. And I think I would like to make sure that if we get to a place where we really are working collaboratively, rather than coming last to the educators to see if something will work, I would like to be part of that conversation so that we could provide to management how things would work in a rollout plan so that we can do this successfully. And I know that there's a lot of rumors out there in terms of what the union is, but I'm just one person of the union. I am Ann Katzburg. I know I'm the president, but
I'm glad I got the right person on
Yeah,
mic.
got the right person. Just one person. But there's 1,700 of us. And I can assure you that there are conversations happening constantly that are not aligned amongst my own members. And every single opinion matters. So it's that challenge of trying to figure out strategically how to get what we need. And so what do? I have to focus on what's going to be best for the circumstances in that we're going to be returning to schools. Well, if we are going to be returning to schools, we need to make sure that they're safe. And so that's what I'm working on right now in negotiations. And I shouldn't say I am, because I have a negotiating team that is doing that. And those are some of the struggles, because what our team is asking for may not be in alignment with what management thinks. And then there's folks that would go back today, and they don't need that kind of safety precaution. So that is a personal decision, but I think that if I'm going to follow guidelines and recommendations, that's a pretty clear pathway to take.
Gotcha. Here's a question about something you said right at the end. Everybody wants safe schools, But I think safe means different things for different people. So how are you guys defining safe as... I recognize the limitations of this question and answer, because just like you were saying, you have this plan in the beginning of June to do one thing. Then you have the plan at the beginning of July to do another thing. Then you have the plan at the end of July to do another thing, right? And I went through the pain too, because every time they canceled the test, it was like, okay, but they've guaranteed the next test will be on. And then, of course, the next test gets canceled. It's like, well, after about the second or third round, I was like, look, I don't know for sure. This is what they've said. That's all I know, because things change so rapidly. And my parents, the families I work with, got incredibly frustrated. Not with me, but just the situation, because you kept having the moving goalposts. And now you have the governor changing up things and adding on layers of difficulty for different counties. So it's very hard to say, hey, this is what I define as safe. But is there something that you guys can point to say, this is what's safe for us? And if this safety is achieved, if these things are achieved, then the union, or at least I and Katzburg, would 100% support going to some level of in-person instruction. Is there that kind of thing, or is it kind of your position, which is, hey, look, it's going to have to be a moving goalpost. We just don't know.
No, not at all. Absolutely. And I think our superintendent has talked about it as well. There are definitely metrics out there, which I'm grateful for. Because in the beginning, in shelter in place, back in the olden days, way back in March, April, May, there weren't those metrics, but we have them now. And there's been a lot of work that has been done through the CDC, through the California Public Health Department, through our county public health. And so that's what we want to follow. And so we know some things. We know that wearing a mask prevents the spread of the virus.
Sure.
Right? So can we ask our students and our educators to wear masks at school? Absolutely. And if that's not healthy for you, for whatever reason, can we do something to make sure that as a student you're supported?
Sure.
And is there plexiglass or other things that we can take? So, looking at all of the factors that impact that, we're concerned about ventilation. And you said here in this room, we have a HEPA filter, you have really good air. We have experienced, and this is for the last 3 years, some significant fires. And our classrooms were not prepared for that. We don't have good air. I'd walk into the district office and I would be struggling with the air, and then I would go to visit my mother, who no longer is with us, but she was up in a assisted living, and it was like, oh, I can breathe. So we've been told that the air filters have been replaced. I just need to know with fidelity that that has taken place and that they're on a rotating basis as far as changing them, and if there is bad air, that they do get replaced. So air is important to us. I think testing is important too. I know that many students are asymptomatic, especially younger ones. That's what the research and the science tells us. So can we have ongoing testing? I heard that through the county health department. Teachers can get tested, but can we have our students tested as well? And so that would give a lot of assurance that we're safe as we enter into these places. When we get the recommendations from our governor, and he's separated everything into different tiers.
Right.
And that's good, because that's good metrics too. The one thing that is kind of interesting is that they're trying to limit the number of participants or gatherings of individuals to like 100, right? Well, none of our schools will ever meet that, even if we do a hybrid return to school, because we have, that's only 50% of our students.
Is that for schools, or is that just for
That's
other
for like
gatherings?
Churches and other gatherings, right?
So does that directly apply to the school paradigm? Okay,
no. So schools are going to have to figure out how to keep the distance with a lot of people. And so I don't know if you've had the pleasure of walking through our hallways when they're passing periods, especially at the high schools. But I'm short, and I get lost in those very, very crowded hallways. People can't see me. And so we're going to really need to figure out how to do this well And there's ways that we can do this. But I think that, bringing in all the voices of the educators, the nurses, folks that have the experiences will help us get to a place where we can figure this all out. So that was kind of what we did this summer with logistics, but we haven't seen it yet. So there's a lot of work to do.
What haven't you seen?
We haven't seen the return of all the students and how that will look.
No. I know that, but I mean, nobody has seen that.
No.
It sounds like you were talking about other very specific things like air filtration or a plan to, like a passing period plan where you have everybody goes one direction.
Well,
and
we
you have a
need,
staggered,
and that's
blah,
just,
blah, blah.
that's the distance. So we need to keep the 6 feet. So how are we going to do that? I mean, you go to the store, you go shopping, right? They have markers everywhere. So we're going to have just a lot of people all at the same time. I mean, pick up and drop off at schools. I just know in normal times, it's quite crowded, right? And so we're just going to have to figure out all of these logistical things. But most importantly, I would say, masks, keeping the distance 6 feet, and then the air, the ventilation, testing, those kind of things will ensure safety. And not for everybody. There's people that are more at risk, wouldn't be sitting in a room right now. And they can't take that, and I know that we have to honor the folks that have either somebody at home that is, has a health impairment and is going to be very impacted by the coronavirus should they get it, or they're have some illness or something themselves, some kind of disability. So those are factors that are really challenging, and trying to make sure that you meet the safety for everybody is tough. And then there's the social emotional. Being apart from people is tough. And I know a lot of our students are having a hard time with that. And are there ways that we can bring people together? And I know right now they're going to start doing some after-school cohorts and allowing for students to start getting some kind of enrichment, sports, and maybe some just socialization.
Gotcha. So it sounds like from your standpoint, the big things for you, the big four, it sounds like, are masks, testing, how do we keep the space, especially when you have kids moving through halls, and ventilation. Gotcha. Well, the masks seems like a dead giveaway.
Yeah, that's easy.
Cleaning air filters also seems pretty straightforward. So who's working on the passing bell period, right? Is that... Who's ironing that one out? Because the testing we can't do anything about. I mean, like, you either have testing or we don't. We're not scientists. We're not making that stuff. But so somebody will figure that out, hopefully. But who's working on that last piece that would unify everybody with going back to school?
Yeah, I think that would have to be done at each campus, because I think you can't really do a uniform, plan. I mean, you can work together and provide some directions, but I imagine that has to be rolled out.
Gotcha. If half of the district ironed that out and the other half didn't, would that be an issue with you as far as supporting going back to school, like on a per campus basis? Or do you feel like it has to be an all-in, we don't go back until everyone is ready?
Well, my goal is that we can come to an understanding pretty soon with our negotiations. And I think everybody that's working, both teams, want to just roll up our sleeves and get this work done, because we know that time is of the essence. And the more time we have to plan and get prepared before we do return in January will benefit everybody. And so those type of technicalities that I was adhering to, there's a million of them. I mean, we are constantly getting lengthy emails from teachers, from parents, all kinds of folks that are thinking about the what ifs, and how this is not going to work. And I think the challenge is it going to work? Well, let's sit down and let's try to figure this out. Living through a pandemic is very challenging. And hopefully things will improve, but we don't know. We're going to be entering into flu season. I got my flu shot the other day, by the way.
Well done.
And I know in Pleasanton, they're going to be returning in January as well. However, they're waiting 2 weeks after the end of winter break to return. And the reason that they're doing that is they want to give folks time to quarantine after their winter travels.
Sure.
And so there's things like that we're not thinking of. And we haven't, we were directed by the trustees to try to get that return date of January 5th. And what are we going to do? Well, our teachers are teaching. And so they're going to be doing finals. You know what it's like. You're preparing students for tests all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to be, constant work. Report cards are going to be due. So as we're in the midst of doing, I believe, and I haven't done a lot of jobs, but teaching's hard. It's exhausting. It's draining. You're on, for the 6 hours that you're with your students, so you don't have time to do any of the planning. Then you have to do the planning. Then you have to do the collaborating. You need to do the professional development. And so the hours of this job and then the grading on top of it is, it's endless. It's a hard job. I'm hearing people are working 60 hours a week just to stay afloat and to deliver to their students. So doing all of this and then trying to figure out how to open.
Are the teachers the ones doing that?
Well, we're going to need to train them because let me just explain. I mean, we do full instruction, right, with our students in any regular time. But during the shelter in place and remote teaching, we've had to learn how to do that. And it was really hard. We have technical difficulties.
Oh, yeah. It's a train wreck. Zoom. Like, if I ever get on Zoom again after this, I'll just kill myself.
I know. Our eyes are going blind. I mean, it's crazy. And then on top of that, the curriculum has to be altered because it's just different how you do things. So you got to adapt. I mean, there's a lot that happens. And especially with teaching younger students, I think that's excessively challenging. Because I was a kindergarten teacher, and some of my students couldn't sit still. And so I had my tricks, like, I'm going to sit right next to you so that you can pay attention and get this done. But we can't do that over a screen. So it's hard. So there's a lot of adaptations that had to be made. So now we're going back into a remote hybrid situation, and folks can still choose, I should say, parents can still choose to keep their kids home. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be some that will send them back. Okay? Now, how do we do that? And how do we keep our classes together? And if we are keeping our classes together, are we teaching the same curriculum? Or does it have to be adapted once again? And so I was in a meeting the other day, and a teacher was asking about the delivery of her lessons and saying, I don't know what I would do if I had to teach my students in the hybrid and the remote at the same time, and how would I, function with that kind of an experience? So it was quite challenging, and just wrapping our heads around it. So that has to happen. We can't work, do all the things we're doing typically to deliver, the education to our students. Boom, go on a 2-week vacation for the winter break, and then start January 5th without any preparation.
Right.
That has to happen.
Do you think that, considering we're not going back in person, and there are very close by school districts that are, do you think it would be possible that we could just tap into what has worked or what has not worked for them in, say, a month or so? Like the Marin or the Palo Alto districts that are in classrooms that are going back in will know right away, hey, this was their method, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We can just say, hey, this science teacher in 5th grade, she had a lab or she had an experiment she was trying to do and it was hybrid. This didn't work, but this person over here had one and that worked. So we don't have to have the burden of troubleshooting, kind of as you're saying, with a full course load.
Right. I think that's what we're doing. And I know that our teachers have been all summer, they were learning how to teach remotely, even though it wasn't being delivered by, the district yet, because the decision hadn't been made. But there's tons of resources out there. And there's people that are always, gathering the information and trying to do it. And there's a lot of information out there of why things don't work. And so being that the research is there and the experiences are going to be happening before us, we are definitely going to utilize that because that's going to be very informative. However, you do need to, I believe, in order to do anything with fidelity, you need to implement it into your workday. So if we want our educators to be on the same page and we want all of our schools to function at the level that we believe is necessary, you have to provide that kind of professional development and collaboration. And I'll just give you an example. I was early on doing a standardized report card for elementary school. And we used to just do, check off 1, 2, 3, 4, ABC, whatever it was. But the standardized report card was a mind shift. It was a real paradigm shift for us. And I remember I was teaching first grade at the time, and right before we had to start assessments, my grade level team would meet for 3 hours. And we would sit and we would talk and we'd work through things and we'd bring questions to each other. And that intellectual process really helped us understand what we needed in preparation for our students. And then we were able to assess them, and then we would do the report cards, and then we would have another 3-hour meeting somewhere in the next quarter. Okay, we kept on doing that. And 3 hours, we got a lot done. Now, do I need, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? No. But I think that we do need to provide the time so that we can go through that processing, that intellectual kind of, fantasizing and then picturing what it is that we actually are going to be doing and trying to implement it. And we're actually working on that right now. So we have teachers that are beginning to start to do some kind of trial lessons on what it would be like to teach remotely and hybrid at the same time. And we're looking at what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the complications. And so we'll work through these things so that when we do get to the place in January, we have a lot of knowledge, and ongoing support is definitely going to be needed.
Okay, here's a question for you. As you're saying all of this, which is all wonderful, I keep coming, when you're like, look, we're working through this tech issue or we're working through that tech issue. It was my understanding that the teachers union was to represent the teachers in a collective bargaining unit and obviously get what's best for the teachers. But it sounds like you guys have been tasked with ironing out like the logistics and the technical aspect of returning to school. Is that how it is, or is the we more of like a we as in the entire school district, or is it literally the union that's doing this?
It's so interesting that you said it that way. It's we're actually, and I hope that this has been coming across to the community for years, is we're here for our students. Nobody goes into teaching because they don't like kids.
No, yeah,
right? And we've been students ourselves. But more importantly, we chose this profession because it's an avocation. It's something that we truly strongly believe in. Everybody has their different reasons for doing things, but I can say with fidelity that teachers are here because we want to make sure that our students get a great education. And so that's what the union has been standing for, ever since I became a teacher. I remember thinking that, we need to have more funding. We need to be able to provide things for our students so that they can get the great education I got growing up in California. And there's just so many reasons that we're here. So that's one aspect of it, is that we want to improve things as the best to our ability. And like I said earlier, we're in the trenches, so we know what is needed. And we want to be part of that conversation. Under the law, which is the EERA, Educational Employees Relations Act, we have the right to negotiate certain subjects of negotiations, and one of them is safety. And so when there is a pandemic and you're worried about safety, then that's where the negotiations comes in. So we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to work through all those things so that we can be safe, but more importantly, our students can be safe. And it's not just for the teachers to keep us safe. I feel like we're really trying to make sure it's safe for everybody.
Anybody who said that teachers don't care about the kids is just foolish. Like that's not a statement that deserves a response in any way. But what you're saying now is, okay, look, we are advocating for the safety of the kids. And there were people, I saw this conversation online, and I'm like, I try to not pay attention to it, but I get sucked in. And people were saying, look, it's not the teachers' union's job to advocate for the safety of the kids. That's the county health board. That's the board of education. That's the management, right? And it's funny. I was thinking just today, I was in my car. It's like, God, it seems like people care about kids more now than ever, because every single party at the table is saying, we're doing it for the kids, right? Like the board saying we're in it for the kids, the union saying we're in it for the kids, and all of them, that's what I talked about in the beginning. It's like everybody's working, but the cogs aren't aligned. So how do you balance the desire to help kids, which you obviously, every single teacher worth their salt wants to help kids. And if you don't, tender your resignation, because this is not the job for you. If you want to help kids and you like teaching, be a teacher. That's it. But there's only so many hours, and there are only so many hours in the day, right? And there's only so much you can bargain for, so much you can go after. So what is it like? How do you manage that? And saying like, we want what's best for the kids, but we also want what's best for the teachers.
And that's a wonderful question, or a wonderful, conundrum, so to speak. If I can explain it to you simply, the teacher's working conditions are the students' learning conditions. So I used to teach kindergarten, and I worked in another district. I worked in the New Haven Unified School District when I first started teaching. And when I entered into my profession back in the olden days, a long time ago, I had 34 kindergarten students. And I had 17 of them were non-English speakers. Okay. Most of them spoke Spanish. I don't speak Spanish.
Neither do I, and I'm Mexican.
Oh, really?
How embarrassing.
I was the first teacher these students had, and a lot of them didn't go to preschool or anything like that. So it's an interesting learning environment. They were wonderful. But I had a hard time, I'm sure, meeting the needs of all of them because there was just so many of them. One teacher and 34. Well, then there was some educational reform, and they lowered class size reduction. You might have been privileged to have that when you were growing up, right? And our class size was 20 to 1. And so I lost 14 students that year. We actually changed in the middle of the year when we were able to get it under control. I remember my principal, and the theme of the district was always, we're just smile with flexibility, and we're just going to manage to get through this year. And we all took that kind of approach. You know what? We've got to be flexible, and we got to do it. The day I had 20 students compared to the 14, it was like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. And I know class size makes such a huge difference. Well, as the union, what did we fight for these last 2 years? Is we really wanted to have smaller class sizes. And we didn't ask for huge increases in salary because there's just so much money that we have, and it's very limited. But we knew that there was enough money to start to reduce class sizes. We did it at the secondary level, and then we were able to do it at the elementary level this last year. We know our students need more counselors, more school psychologists, nurses, librarians. And it was like we weren't ever reaching those goals. I had been part of the LCAP, the Local Control Accountability Planning Committee, since its inception. And I was the president, I think, right when we started that back in 2013. And so we worked on plans to try to make improvements using all of the stakeholders' ideas of what our schools needed. And we kept on saying year after year, we need more counselors because our kids are struggling. And it never happened because there's always something else that has to be taken care of. And so we know that once we started to organize and management know that this is what our members need. We need to lower the ratio so that our students can have more services. That was the struggle that we've been working through for the last couple years. And so it is to improve things for our students. It makes a difference.
Gotcha. So you really feel like it's the task of the teachers union to kind of shape and guide the educational experience that our kids have?
I think that it is definitely, like I've been saying, we're the ones that are in the trenches, and we understand what our students need. And I mean, I went to Berkeley like you did. I did a program afterwards. I got a teaching credential. I worked on a special education credential. I went, through years and years of school to become an educator. And then once I became an educator, I didn't stop. I kept learning. We go to school all year. We take professional development. We learn in the summer. I've taken multiple classes through various universities, read constantly. We're always working to try to improve our practices. And because we have that level of expertise and we are the professionals, I would only hope that our ideas, our opinions, and our ability to help contribute to the conversation would be at the forefront of how decisions are determined.
Yeah, I mean, I first off, for sure, teachers need a union. I think when you become so specialized in something like this and you commit so much of your life, say like you're teaching kindergartners, right? If you've been teaching kindergartners for 25 years, it's not like you can just leave and become an accountant at the drop of a hat, right? So as you sacrifice a lot of malleability and flexibility and plasticity with your career, it's important to know that you won't be prisoner to that specialization, right? So again, I 100% agree that, hey, look, the teachers and teachers union should have some seat at the table. I mean, I think in the absence of that, in the absence of hey, look, our voice matters, not this individual, but like collectively we matter. That's a really important piece. The thing, it seems like there's different people have different ideas though about where the lines of input and power should be drawn. That's what seems like keeps coming up, which is kind of like, look, the teachers union is doing this and they're saying they're doing it for the kids, and the board is saying they're doing this and they're doing it for the kids. Here's something that I've been wondering. There were a few strikes that have been threatened, 2 or 3. I'm not trying to pin you down to numbers.
2 years.
2 years. And there, among other things, you guys are getting, I mean, you could tell me exactly what you're getting. Obviously, pay increases and then additional resources or smaller class sizes. And the board, it sounds like, and again, I was not there, but it sounds like you guys had a protracted negotiation, the 6 months leading up to the final acceptance, I think in March. And the teachers union was holding out for something, the board was holding out, and then an agreement was made, okay? Why was the board holding out? Because it's obvious, like, I have a good friend. Her name's Leslie Smith. She's a professional fighter, okay? I love Leslie. She's great, and she's an enormous advocate for fighters union, okay? So she fights on television. This is a professional athlete. Wow. She's amazing. Incredibly bright, too, by the way. When I met her, we were chatting about what I did, and she's like, I scored the 99th percentile on the SAT. I'm like, damn it, man, I knew it. She's a very, very bright cat, right? So she just happens to like fighting. So she's an enormous advocate for a fighters union, because these fighters kill themselves, not just on TV, right? Like, because yes, they do that, but the months and years of wear and tear it takes to get to that level of proficiency, it's unbelievable. Like, the average person, I don't think, can conceptualize it. And there's one person at the top of the UFC named Dana White, and Dana White is rich as can be. Like, I'm sure Jeff Bezos and he hang out on jets together all the time. So Dana White makes all this money. So Leslie says, look, these fighters are killing themselves, and Dana White's taking home this paycheck, right? Like, we need a union to say, hey, give us don't give us all the pie, just give us a bigger piece of the pie. And of course, it's a tug of war, right? Because Dana White's pulling left, and the fighters union, although you were fighters, I believe you. The fighters union would theoretically be pulling right, trying to get more of that budget. But both parties are obviously self-interested. It's like the fighters want more pay and Dana White wants more jets or whatever. I don't know Dana White. I'm sorry, Dana White. But the point is, the board doesn't have a self-interest, right? That's what keeps perplexing me. The board gets paid, I think, like under $5,000 individually each year. So when they hold out in a negotiation, they're not holding out to enrich themselves or fatten their pockets in any way, right? What do you think the board holds out for? Like, why are they doing that? Why don't they just agree to what you guys request?
That would be wonderful. I think it is a question of what do you prioritize? And when we do a proposal, and it's called a sunshine, there's a lot of work that goes into it prior to us submitting it.
A proposal to the board?
Yeah. For
like
every
budget
year,
or something.
every year we negotiate a contract. And there's openers. It's a 3-year contract, but there's openers every single year on salary, benefits, and then 2 other choices. Each party gets 2 choices of what they'd like to open up in the contract. So we'll just say for a conversation piece that we are always interested in opening up class size and work day. Okay, and those are things that we could negotiate on. What ends up happening is we do a preparation based on the budget. We analyze the budget. And in analyzing the budget, we think, okay, what is like a salary that we believe we can ask for given the additional funding that's coming to the school district? And so that's how we determine things. So last year, when we did our salary proposal, we just did 2.5%. And I remember in discussion with our superintendent at the time, he said it was excessively reasonable. We weren't being extreme at all. And then we had some other things. I didn't think negotiations would be so challenging because we'd already gone through 1 year before. And the prior year, we had settled on so many wonderful things after the struggle. Okay? And then my goal, because I talk to people all over the state, and I look at school districts like we talked earlier about having models that have already implemented successful negotiations. What can we do to, mimic the same kind of behavior? I wanted a cultural shift. And so we developed a plan in 2019 that we were going to work together collaboratively on a budget committee. So I didn't think it was necessary to fight. Money is money. It's not questionable. That never happened, okay, even though we had settled on it in 2019. I wanted to have more time to work collaboratively with management, and that never happened. We had planned on doing some training for our negotiations team, and at the time, management was kind of exhausted after the whole year and felt that it was going to be too difficult to start doing some training for our negotiations team. And so I thought, well, let's do it in the summer when my folks aren't in the classroom, because my bargaining team are teachers. They have classrooms.
Yeah, right.
So they're not doing this for a living. So, and I gave a lot of suggestions, and it was ignored. And then the last thing that was really difficult is we had agreed at the time with the school board to work together on bringing additional funding to our schools. And we wanted to do a statewide initiative and maybe some local funding as well, because we know that we can't always depend on the state to provide the funding for our schools, and the funding has been woefully inadequate for years. So we're not fighting over millions of dollars like Dana White has.
Dana White, yeah.
Yeah, right? We don't have very much. And then, it's like, can we sit down together and really prioritize these things? Well, if you've been paying attention to the school board meetings for the last year, the trustees have never been able to endorse. It was first Schools and Communities First, and then it became now Prop 15, which would bring over $18 million in revenue just to San Ramon Valley Unified School District. And that could provide more services for our students. That could provide more counselors. And we even set up this last year's negotiations based on that passing. So if Prop 15 passes, our students are going to benefit greatly. We've already directed that money, not towards salaries, but towards increasing, like the counselors, the nurses, the psychologists, the speech and language pathologists, and lowering the class sizes. So all of those are going to be hopefully implemented once Prop 15 passes. We're also in a crisis right now because of the pandemic, and the economy is not great either. So we truly need to make sure that we have a funding source that's going to add more revenue. And it's a question of, why did we have to fight to get the things that we did? Well, in 2019, we had that letter. We anticipated a really smooth transition to negotiations. And then when we started negotiations, there was hesitancy coming from management to negotiate. And there was a bunch of contract language that was going back and forth that was just getting crossed out. And it was like, why? Why can't we talk what happened? And there was conversations with some of the trustees, and even though in sharing information, they seemed to have forgotten it after we spoke to them. And I don't understand why. But I think that I can't project. I'm not sure what happened, where the division happened with the negotiating teams and our relationship, but it obviously has impacted that relationship. And so our members, every time I went to a school site and I spoke to our educators, I could hear in their voices how upset they were, and what they needed to feel safe and to build trust. And so as the year proceeded and we got closer to the end of the school, and before the new year in 2020, it got to the point where we just had to declare impasse because we weren't getting anywhere. And during impasse, you can continue to negotiate, but that just didn't happen. And we weren't able to achieve that. And so we went through the mediation, and then we went to fact-finding. And in fact-finding, we kept on hearing that there was a budget deficit. And when we did fact-finding, we saw there was actually a budget surplus. And so we need to be able to have the common understanding of what we're looking at. And in order to get to that place where we can converse and truly trust each other, it's going to take a lot of work. I know Dr. Malloy is trying really hard to keep me informed and call me and talk to me, and I'm trying to do that as well. And it's going to just take that effort for us to continue to, keep the dialogue going.
Yeah, I get that. And thank you for continuing to try. I mean, obviously starting relationships new after it hasn't been great is obviously difficult. But if I may, one more time, so the management had told you guys that there was a deficit, or excuse me, the board, and then it turned out that was not true. What is motivating them to do that? Because it's not personal gain. So, and again, I don't know if that's true or not. I take your word for it. My point is, what are they working towards?
Yeah. So what happens in a budget? And we all know that. I mean, we all.
Well, I think it's pretty complex, actually. I don't quite know.
But we all have to budget, okay? And so there's different funds that we can designate our money to, okay? And there's an unrestricted fund, which is called Fund 1. And then there's a designated fund called Fund 17.
What happened to the others in between 1 and
like
17?
Salary and other things that you really, it's designated.
I thought it jumped
money.
right from 1 to 17. I was like, well, let me start off by clearing up this problem.
This is just unrestricted, okay? What do we have in our budget? And then they started Fund 40, which is for buildings. Okay, so there's different funds there's pots of money there. And what ended up happening is they just didn't include, I think it was Fund 17, when they said we were deficit spending.
And 17 is the building?
40 is the building. 17 is like for books and supplies, textbooks and things like that. And so we can, we put money away. And I understand we do need textbooks, right?
Well, yeah, it's hard to teach without them.
Right. But a lot of my educators are saying they haven't gotten them. And so that becomes complex too. I feel like the more I understand where the money's going and how it's being spent, the easier it is for me to help our members with the issues that they're saying. So I could say, you know what? They have to buy science textbooks in this year. So they need to save $6 million in order to supply the students with that money.
And we can't save that money on the year we need the books. So we have to front load the savings, say 5, 6, 7 years to make sure we have this cache of money.
Exactly.
And so what you're saying is there was money going into that piggy bank, let's say for books, Fund 17. There was money going into that book piggy bank, and they didn't count that as the discretionary funds they could pay people because they said, hey, this is money that we're going to need in, say, like a year or in 2 years to purchase these books. And you guys you and the teachers union felt that's money that should be counted on the budget that we could take into account when we're figuring out our raises.
Right. And also, I mean, when you see year after year, and it hasn't happened, I don't even know what the budget is this year. I haven't analyzed it. But year after year, there was an increase of the reserves. And that's what happened the very first year when we decided that we needed to start working harder and assuring that we could lower class sizes, which eventually led to us almost striking. Because year after year, we kept on seeing an increase in the reserves. And so when you see the budget, you think, well, this money is for this year's second grader. And it's not being spent. There, and the district is not a bank. So we didn't want to keep seeing the reserves. And there's a certain level of, we believe that management should definitely have a reserve. We want to make sure that the district's solvent. This is our bread and butter.
Right.
Like,
and
I
if
wouldn't
something
say,
like the coronavirus hits, we have reserves.
Right, exactly. Or even, for the 3 years out. And we know that the employees in a school budget are the greatest costs, right? Somewhere, if you think about, benefits and everything else, it's about between 86 to 90% across the state is how much districts' budgets go towards just the employees. And so if we lose money and there's not enough money, that's us. We're losing people.
If we don't have reserves.
If we don't have the money, yeah. So we need to be able to come back to the table in hard times and in good times. And that takes trust. And that's the relationship that we really, truly need to rebuild and do our best as leaders to try to achieve that. And I talk about everybody from the trustees to management, our leaders in the union as well as, the other unions. Our kids are depending on us to do that.
Right. Well, I think our kids are depending on everyone to get it together.
Right.
So bottom line is you think management was motivated to increase the reserve emergency funds, or like line 17 for science books, to have that, and you guys felt that, one, the reserves could be smaller, and two, you could liberate some of like the textbook funds and savings.
I wouldn't say that, and I don't think that's accurate. I don't know what the motivation is. I think that, they do their job. They're supposed to keep the reserves, and that is what they are trying to do. And I'm not criticizing that. But what I would like to make sure is that if there is extra additional funding, that we can talk about it. And the door was always closed to us. We just couldn't get into the room, and we couldn't talk about it. And that's where it became a struggle for us.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Here's, if I may pivot, and that makes perfect sense. When you're, what were you saying, 86% is salaries?
It's between 86 to 90%, which
Great.
is, yeah.
Okay, so that makes...
Employees,
excuse me.
Everything employees.
So with the increase, good Lord. Okay, so I'm self-employed. I always have been. And when I it's a great time to be an SAT tutor, let me tell you. It's fantastic. So with being self-employed, I've always paid things like my health care right out of my pocket because I don't have a choice. And
right.
And I think when I left college, my health care was like $150 a month or something. And now it's astronomical. Now, mind you, I have a family of 5, but we pay upwards of, I think, like $30,000 a year for health care. And my dad is incredibly critical of the Affordable Care Act he's a small employer, but he had I think like 10 employees at one point, and he was saying, look, this is ridiculous. We're paying like $1,000 for a 27-year-old male a month for healthcare. It's absurd. I was like, good Lord, right? So as those costs increase, right, astronomically, in my opinion, but they far outpace the increase that we get per student from the state, right? And as pensions increase, because it's my understanding the pensions have about doubled in the last decade, the total liability for the pensions.
Yeah, my pension did not double, but
No. The total liability that the district
but the
has
contribution to the pension fund from the district used to be, since the 70s, it was the same. It never varied. It was like 10% that the district paid and the employee paid 8%. And then that increased for the employees. So we contribute more and the state contributes. And then, yes, the districts had to. And
Right.
Governor Newsom in the last couple of years has lowered that slightly, but it's still significantly more.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the contribution that the district pays and the teachers pay and everybody pays in has about doubled, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not making more money, but I didn't mean to convey it that way.
Right.
So as the pension liability, right, increases and the health, the benefits package increases in cost and far outpaces the annual increases we get from the state, how do we balance working together, right, the union and the board? How do you guys balance figuring out how to deal with that? Because obviously the liabilities are increasing greater than the income, so we essentially have a smaller pie to slice up.
You're you're super accurate, and that's been the struggle. And like I said early on in my youth, we had great schools, and we had the top funding in the nation, one of the top, maybe 5. Now we're probably around 38, but there were times when we were like 50, rock bottom, and that's because we just weren't collecting enough revenue due to the split, the Prop 13, which dramatically changed things. And we know that as a personal resident, that has helped, like Grandma, who's in the same home, and the taxes kept on going up. I remember that when I was a child, that the taxes kept on going up.
Right, like they had a big tax strike, right? Because the
Right.
taxes, the property taxes were greater than the mortgages.
So Prop 13 kind of stabilized it at this 1978 place, right? And all the personal residents kept on paying their taxes, and it ended up that we were contributing now 2/3 of what was supposed to be split between personal residents and corporations. And corporations, they ended up having this loophole that they weren't contributing their fair share, okay, in taxes for their property taxes. So Disneyland, for example, is paying 1978 property taxes, but they're not charging 1978 prices for those tickets, right?
That's true.
It also is not fair to the competition, so to speak. Like newer businesses have to pay for the property that they have. So if you're an older business, you are able to get more income, more revenue, because you don't have to pay out as much in your property taxes. So it just isn't fair. So when I go to the future, because yes, we have the pension, which is a security that as educators, we don't make a lot of money. I don't know how you're doing in your own business over there, but
Let me just tell you, I have plenty of time for podcasts these days.
but I'm getting a salary. But you know what? If I had gone out into the private sector after my education and everything, I could have had a potentially much more, income.
I think lucrative.
Lucrative
is the word.
Yes, right. Generating experience, but I didn't. I chose to be a teacher, and so in doing that, I am limited. I come from a family that has a lot of successful lawyers, doctors, other people that are making a lot of money, and I see the quality of their lifestyle, which I just can't, achieve with this salary, but that's okay. So I know that these decisions matter. So what I have is salary, and I have a future of a pension that I'll get to gather upon retirement. In San Ramon, we fought really hard to keep our health benefits. Now, management has done a really good job of trying to preserve enough money for the increases for our health benefits.
Good job, management.
Yeah, they have. And they haven't gone up that much. We have a good broker, so we're the increases are what we're anticipating. So I think that, if we can keep on this pathway of not going exorbitant where every year they're just going crazy, we're going to be okay. It used to be a time when they increased much more than they are now. I think we save about 7% each year in anticipation of increased costs for that. But what's going to happen is if we don't get some more revenue, yes, it's going to be dire, and there will be consequences. So that's why I'm working super hard to get Prop 15 passed. And I think it will pass because our voters in California are always in favor of supporting education. But in the event that it doesn't, then it's going to be a really losing situation for our students.
Well, how do we make it not a losing situation for our students?
We need more revenue.
Well, no, I know that. But what I'm saying is, like, say the worst should pass and 15 doesn't pass, and that's the worst case scenario, okay? How do we make that? Because it's very easy to say, well, this better happen or else it's going to be bad for our kids. But let's just say it doesn't go perfectly. How do we not make our students lose if Prop 15 doesn't pass? Because I don't think anybody wants them to lose.
We won't have any options. We're going to have to, because we've decreased class sizes, and we were anticipating more decreases, lower class sizes, and more counselors. So we're going to lose counselors. The ratio is going to increase. We're going to lose nurses. The ratio is going to increase. We're going to have larger class sizes because there just won't be enough money. So you said, we have this, we have that. Well, something has to give. So class sizes are expensive. When you reduce it by one student, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
One student in a class is hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Yeah, I mean, because you do it across the board, because we have a contract. So if we reduce class size by one, that's 23 more teachers across the district.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
See what I'm saying? So so I mean, it's in the millions of dollars. So it ends up costing quite a bit to take those reductions. So we're going to we will lose teachers. We definitely will if it doesn't pass. And then we'll be back at the bargaining table and we'll have to decide where we're going to cut. And that's going to be the conversation we'll have.
Right. Because I think everybody's looking at the situation we're in right now and just feeling like, okay, why aren't people negotiating better? Right. And I understand what you said. This isn't necessarily posing a question to you, but it sounds like everybody is saying, look, what is going on? People saw this stuff coming, or why can't people just agree? Which is why I initially asked, look, what's motivating the other side? Because it's very clear, to me at least, that you genuinely are motivated by helping your teachers, representing the teachers, helping the students, making the best working environment for both, right? I mean, because again, the classroom where the teacher teaches, students learn, everybody has to have heating, for instance, in the class, or filtered air. It just seems like one of those things where do we keep relying so heavily on our community? Because I feel like that's what is really happening. I mean, when we were going to Green Valley, there were so many different fundraisers. And when they said hey, the suggested contribution is, I think it was $672 exactly. I was like, well, whatever. So my wife and I, we were kindergarten parents at the time. We're like, well, let's give them the suggested donation, right? If everybody does this, then we all win. And then it was a month later, it was like, well, now we have this, and well, now we have that. And it's really forcing the public education families to be in a partial, hybrid private school because of the amount of money that they need to kick in. how do you, is that something that the union worries about? Or is it just kind of, hey, we need to increase revenue to afford these things, and then we just do the best we can?
Oh, absolutely. I worry about it. And me and Katzburg worries about it. And I would believe that union members would worry about it, because the way that the funding shifted after, Prop 13 is it went to the state. And so the state now is responsible for the majority of the funds that we get. It doesn't come from local property. It comes from the state fund. Mm-hmm. And we end up seeing that it's not enough. And so if you work in an affluent district like San Ramon Valley, there's the opportunity for the parent community to contribute. And they do for the reasons that you said. They want to have, the best for their own children. But is that fair? Is it fair for them to have to contribute, and can we depend on that money? And during the pandemic, the contributions from the parent community has diminished slightly because, people have a lot of uncertainty in their own work, in their own lives. And so then, programs are cut, teachers are cut, things happen. And it's just not a stable source of revenue. It's something that I don't think that we should be dependent upon. I really do believe that we have to increase the revenues in the state in order to provide the best for all of our districts. We have 1,000 districts in the state of California. I know, talking with the Assemblywoman, Rebecca Bauer-Kahn, she says that there's money that is in the state right now that we can, like the tax cuts that people get for certain things, if we start to look at those, and if they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, aim to be doing, and if they're not, maybe they should be revoked, and we should bring back some of the money that we're providing for people and look at different avenues of sources of revenue.
Yeah, it is one of those things where when you think about the increasing liabilities on an annual basis, it's just it's a daunting picture.
We're the 5th largest economy in the world, though. California. 5th largest economy. So there is money. But that money is based on unstable revenue. We know that.
Well, it's also not being distributed evenly. Right. And obviously, if you have a school that's like you started at 50% or ish, English second learners, you're going to need different resources to educate those kids. And they deserve a public education, not in a language they don't understand, right? I mean, obviously you want to teach them English, but hey, let's bring them along. Let's work this out. But them, yeah. Right. I mean, if you don't, then you might as well just deny them education, because it's going to be incredibly hard to well, whatever. We don't have to get into that. I mean, obviously that's a conversation for another day. But you mentioned before we started, and we touched on it, that there have been a couple threats of strikes, and you found them to be very useful. Could you elaborate on that?
I don't know if that's exactly how I would frame it.
Take your time. I didn't mean to put that word into your mouth or anything.
I think it was hard. It's the hardest 2 years I've ever gone through in my life. It was a struggle. It was something that I didn't want to do. It's not like, okay, let me, wake up today and we're going to strike. It was, we were very measured on what were the things that we needed to do in order to accomplish what we wanted to achieve. And so each step of the way, when things kept on, when we got pushback, and we did a number of actions. We had rallies. I know that no trustees ever came out to talk to us.
Well, a rally is not a time to have a normal conversation.
Well, I know that, since COVID has started, there's been some uprisings at the school district, and trustees have gone outside to talk. Superintendent has gone outside to talk. Nobody ever came out to talk to us. We've had presentations at the school board. The personal learning initiatives was something that came on when Rick Schmidt, after his first year, he started to implement them. And they came up with these 10 plans of personal learning objectives. And at that time, we weren't asked how this was going to impact us. And so I had to ask my members who kept on complaining to me. I said, it doesn't help me to hear you. I like to hear you, but the trustees are the ones that need to hear. So they started to go and talk at the school board. And that was great because then, the trustees did listen and they made some changes as a result of that. All of those things were really trying. And I think, when you do stick up for yourselves and you stand up and you share your thoughts, I did see a really positive impact. So going back to the strike, for years we had been trying really hard to negotiate lower class sizes. We had a special ed task force, I think it was about 6 years ago, and it was a very collaborative, wonderful process. We made a ton of recommendations, and they were simply ignored. I think it was just an exercise in futility because the trustees didn't even listen or hear what those recommendations were.
Wait, did you guys tell them at a board meeting? I mean, what do you
we
mean
wanted
they didn't
to,
listen?
and then we were told that they couldn't be presented at a board meeting because the reason behind that is it was going to have to be negotiated. So it was illogical. It was under Mary Shelton. It didn't make sense. And then, Superintendent Schmidt came, and those were on a shelf for a few months before we even got to look at them. So this was difficult because our special education students for years, it has been really hard to get any improvements for them. And so we had to push super hard for the most fragile students in the district. And we did make improvements. Our nurses, they had been coming to me for 5 years. And they said they started in 2000 with 8 nurses, I think it was. And it was 2015, 16, and they still had 8 nurses, but our district had doubled in size. So their job had gotten so difficult. I can ask all I want. I'm just one person, right? I don't think people want to hear from me. They really don't. So I can try, as much as I can. I can be nice. I can be kind. I can, say things inappropriately, but it's not going to make a difference. Only thing that made a difference, I noticed, was the voices of our members. And so that's why I think that the strikes, or almost potential strikes, were tough. It was how we were able to get the results that we needed for the enhancements our students deserved.
If I may, do you think that the fact that it came to that was a failure for both parties? And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to put you down at all. What I'm saying is it's so terrible to see from a parent standpoint, from a community member standpoint, it's like, oh, Lord, if the school districts fall apart. I mean, we see now what happens when you start messing with schools, right? It's a terrible thing. It's to see the teachers to that point, right? Do you think that do you think that both parties could work together better, or do you think that it's more on the management?
Oh, no. I think both parties definitely can work better together. And I tried that. And like I said, in 2019, I really did look at some districts, and I met superintendents that were just delightful. And I met union presidents that said they got along so well, and they didn't ever have any of these issues that we saw and what I was witnessing in San Ramon. And I was thinking, why? And so they gave me recommendations and suggestions. So the one president that I spoke to in Moreno Valley, he said they almost went to a strike, but when they might have went on strike, but at the point that they did, they came back the following year with a structure that really created a strong foundation for collaboration. And it was that paradigm shift.
Could we get a copy of that structure?
Yeah, I have it. I gave it to management. I shared it with them. And so we tried to negotiate it. We had it in writing. And then the following year, it was just forgotten. So I am open to suggestions. I'm willing to work as collaboratively as possible, and to not to have this struggle. But when I'm, trying in 2019, and then once we start, I think on March 19th, I started having a conversation after we ended on March 8th with the negotiations about how we can do this better. And I kept on getting pushback and pushback and pushback until we got to the point where once again, we're even in a deeper crevice than we were the year before in terms of how we were collaborating.
I don't understand why what is being requested that is so disagreeable? Like, what is that impasse? Because again, it's not like the Dana White example where the board makes every dollar that you take out of the board's pocket comes directly out of their pocket, right? Like it's not for them.
Let me say that when we started our negotiations, we ended up with what we were asking for.
What are you talking about last year? Or I don't know the details of the negotiation.
Yes,
I'm not saying.
Pretty much each year we got what we were asking for. And so that's my struggle. I was done on, we had a 25-hour negotiation session. And at the end of those 25 hours, when we were doing our fact-finding and we finally settled, I went into the room to sign the contract. And it was the first time that I saw the other team in those 25 hours because it's done with a
you're in separate rooms.
Yeah, we're in separate rooms, and yes.
So you guys hang out and eat pizza in one room, and they hang out in the other room.
No, we buy dinner together. We do all that,
gosh.
but no, it is an interesting experience. And at the end, when I went into the room and I saw them, it was hard for me because I was like, why did I have to fight like this? You know, when we ended up getting what we needed, but it was such a hard fight. And I don't understand why. And like I said, I tried really hard. My goal is to try to bridge that gap. How can we come together? I understand that there's perspectives and each trustee has their own different perspective, and they somehow vote, as a group. They pretty much are always 5-0 in making their decisions. And where can we get to that entryway where the trustees are looking at the teachers as much as they're looking at management to determine what's necessary? I mean, they have one employee, and that's the superintendent. And the superintendent, I mean, all of them have been lovely people. I have nothing against them, and I think they're doing the best that they can. But there's some link that's missing. And like I said, I tried to replicate it with the negotiations, and it didn't come to fruition. So maybe with Dr. Malloy, I can work something out, and hopefully we can start to see a shift. I know my members are tired. I don't want to go through this every year.
Right. And I think the community is too. I mean, the anxiety that people are feeling around, like, oh my gosh, the teacher's going to threaten a strike again. And then it's just this horrendous ordeal of uncertainty and anxiety that people go through, and it's exhausting.
It is exhausting.
Right? It's one of those things where people are just like, I can't. I mean, just imagine 25 hours in a room going back and forth. It's a marathon. How do you manage the varying opinions within the union? Because it's not always it's impossible that everyone agrees all of the time. And especially now, there are people that I'm sure want to go back, and there are people that want to be more cautious, right? And there are people that, whatever, they're not worried about it, they're not high risk. How do you manage making or driving policy or advocating for a certain position when you have such a varied kind of consensus, or lack of consensus, rather?
Yeah, you know what? It is just a question of priorities. People aren't going to do what they don't want to do. And so if you really want something, then you're going to fight for it. And a lot of times people say, we just don't have time, and that's fine. If you don't have time, then nothing's going to happen.
I'm sorry, I should have been more. My apologies for interrupting. What I mean is more of, okay, let's say with returning to school, right? There are, I think somebody said something about the Palo Alto School District or the Marin School District, and that there were a large body of teachers that didn't want to go back to school, but the board voted unanimously they went back against the majority of what the teachers wanted, but the board said, hey, look, we got to get back in school. Is it, more specifically, is it your kind of MO that it's, hey, look, I'm going to try to steer the union in the direction of the majority of the union members. So if the majority don't want to go back to school or don't feel safe, and as ambiguous a term as that is, then I will push to not go back to school. Or if the majority of teachers do want to go back to school, then I'll push to go back.
So one of the things that I did when I was looking at striking, okay, and bringing the members through a strike to that point, is I said, I won't do it. I won't do it if I don't have 98% of my members behind me. So that's a tiny majority of people that may not want to do it.
Sure.
So that's how we measured it. And so if people aren't willing to show up, then it's not going to happen. So I want to reframe what you just said, because we're teachers. We want to be with our students. There's nobody that doesn't want to be in school. In school right now is remote. And we want to make sure that we have the provisions in place that we can do it safely. And I think that would work for everybody.
Yes, but that word safely is quite dubious, right? I mean, what is safe? Safe for one person. Safe for me means something that different. Safe for my wife, right? And like, we're in the same household. We have agreed upon protocol, but then there's wiggle room there, and we're the most in line with each other that we could be, right? So when you say, hey, everyone will be happy to go back when it's safe, that's kind of like it's almost like a non sequitur, because it's an impossible term to define.
We're going back, okay? That was a decision that was made by the trustees. And we're working with, through the negotiations process to see what is that going to look like so that we can go back.
So we're potentially going back.
No, we're going back.
Okay.
We're going back.
As long as all of the stuff that you guys are worried about for safety is done.
Well, students are going back, right? So that has already been determined. And so...
Well, it's kind of a silly thing to say. We are going back and then separating the teachers from the students.
Right.
Right.
But there's different plans in place, and I'm not sure what is going to be the final plan when we do go back. But I know there's different sensitivities when it comes to the pandemic. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we don't walk in anybody's shoes. And I've heard a lot of really cruel things, statements that have been made about people. And, I'm going to go back, and you don't care about kids, and if you don't want to go back. But we don't know what are the circumstances that are impacting anybody. And so I think that there needs to be a way to ensure that people do feel comfortable. And you see, the divisiveness in our own country and the leadership or lack thereof in how we can best achieve a thriving economy during a pandemic. And there's all these mixed messages of, wearing masks, not wearing masks. And we need to follow the science and what the science is truly advising us. And so that's where I want to fall, is making sure that we use what we know and we don't guess. I don't want anybody dying.
No, I don't think anybody wants anyone dying. I think that should go
And so
without
that
saying.
takes responsibility.
Well, okay. I get that. And again, nobody wants someone dying from COVID, but the only way to assure that the possibility of that happening is zero is if there is no COVID, right? So in the absence
Or a
of this,
vaccine.
well, you also have anti-vaxxers, right? I mean, we have the measles now. So that's unfortunate for everybody who gets it. So you have, even if we had a vaccine, there's no way to ensure that the coronavirus is not alive and well in at least a small population of people. So is there a level of risk that we just have to naturally assume by being human beings and functioning in a public school setting?
Yes, and I think that you have to also remember that it's not just you.
Well, it's definitely not me. My kids go to private school, so I know it's definitely not me.
I'm just saying you as an individual. And it is a community. So when you think about the impact of a novel virus that we don't understand entirely, but we're working very hard to make sure that we have medication that can, limit the impact. And then we also have a vaccination that hopefully will be coming soon. There are ways that we can establish some kind of a herd
immunity.
Immunity,
yes.
Sorry, not mentality, immunity. And that
you're a union president, of course.
know.
Herd mentality. This is your jam, lady. Come on now.
I got it in my brain. So no, but that is something that we have to contend with, and we have to trust the legislators that they will make decisions when it comes to the anti-vaxxers. That we need to keep people safe. I don't want anybody killing my sister.
Killing your sister? What do you?
Because if she got coronavirus, it would kill her. She has a compromised immune system, and so when it's those kind of circumstances and those decisions, and do we need to be a teacher? And is that the only thing we have? And if I'm not safe, can I do something else possibly? And those are life decisions we'll have to make too. But in the meantime, when we're working this school year, and we have really one semester that we're looking at, how can we do it? How can we do it with joy? How can we bring back to our students a sense of community? I think that, the students are doing well. A lot of them are doing really well in the remote learning. Some students feel really grateful. I see letters from students. So I think that we need to continue to understand that this is hard. I'm not a child right now. I feel for our children. I really do. I went through life never having to shelter in place and not play with my friends. And the sacrifices they are making are gigantic. And so I think that, we need to try our best to make sure that we can do whatever it is possible within the parameters that we have to live in. I can't deny them. Nobody can deny them. This is, like I've always said, the coronavirus has the last word. It's not my decision.
Gotcha. So you essentially just have to assess as we go, because we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Exactly. Yep. I'm not one of those people that is going to say, no, you absolutely are not going back to school. That's not where I'm coming from. I think that you have to do the best to make a decision on based on what you know and what's in front of you.
You said something just a couple minutes ago that you were like, look, we're going back. We are going back. And then quickly after that, you said, well, kids are going back. Do you see this as a potential split, as in like when the board says, hey, look, January, whatever start date, it's like, well, the kids will be there, but whether or not teachers will be there, obviously there was some separation that you made. What did you mean by saying, well, kids will be back?
Well, that's what the trustees have scheduled, is for our students to return. And so in the meantime, we need to negotiate all those terms for the teachers. And so once we finish the negotiations, then, the teachers will be back. So we need to make sure that that gets done real quickly, hopefully within this next week.
God, how wonderful would that be? Oh, I think everybody would just lose their minds. It's almost like if you just told me how much longer I had hold my breath. It's like I can get to that point. Right, I think that's the sentiment. I mean, I know every horrendous thing that we were going through, even this year, when all of a sudden I was on Zoom with students, and it's like, okay, you said it would be 2 weeks.
I know,
and
right?
Now it's months, and it's like, oh my gosh. And then we get into July, and they kick it out again. It's like, I can't, if you just told me that it was 3 months and hold on as hard as you can, I could do that. But the moving goalpost is just, So if you guys could iron that out, just do the community a solid and iron it out in the next week.
We have to have trust, too, because like you said, things change. And we need to constantly reassess, and we have to have the willingness to come back together. So I'm a proponent for task force. Forces that, can get together and evaluate and see what needs to be tweaked here and there, and, to do the best that we can, because the ongoing communication is going to keep us at a place where people will feel secure. We need our admin to be able to support their teachers so that the teachers can do the best job possible.
Here's a really out there question. Is there like a penalty or a pain button or something that we could envision you could hit so that when negotiations and the worst comes to pass, you and the board don't get along, there's not a discussion of striking? Like, is there in the plans that you said you found these other districts, how did they manage when they came to an impasse without throwing the strike onto the table? Because it seems like you're like, look, that's a good hammer.
Well,
That's and we're shooting for what's best for the kids and for the teachers. And this is how one of the biggest ways we've been able to get it is use this hammer. It's a good hammer, right? But just bringing the hammer out hurts people. So is there an alternative hammer aside from having the strike come onto the table?
Absolutely there is. Whoever makes the decisions, and that would be the trustees, they're the ones that really need to be able to listen and be able to work with us.
So they need to get in shape.
Well, I'm not saying they are, they're not. I'm just putting it out there that the decisions that are made are going to impact everybody. And when you get stuck in your place, that you're not going to listen and you're not going to be able to hear what the other side is saying, it's risky. And so I think that it would be a different place in San Ramon if we had the ability to work with the Board of Education in a way that they truly did trust and honor the educators.
But the whole pain button or alternative strike is not. It's really like, hey, the Board of Education needs to listen to us.
I told you I talk really well. Talk a lot. Ann Katzburg's one person, and I'm not listened to. And I'm a pretty good communicator. I write well. I talk a lot. It's not as though I'm keeping things secret. So something has to give. And I think that it's not just my voice that really matters. And so I really tried hard to bring my members to the equation so that they could be heard. And so that's what we do. We write letters. We wrote tons of letters over the summer. Now, I don't even ask my members. They keep writing letters because they want to share. Mm-hmm. They want to be heard. And so at some point, if you're not listened to, then you got to do something. And I don't know what else to do
other than strike.
Other than to start to say, we're at an impasse. Impasse is the first step. An impasse means that we just haven't been able to meet somewhere in the middle here. Let's try to do that. And at that point, I think if I was a trustee, I would want to sit down with me, and I'd want to sit down with other leaders, and I'd want to try to figure out how can we reach an agreement. And let's do whatever we can, because we can't go this far.
I got you. Well, Ann, it's been an hour and 40 minutes almost. I know you said you didn't want to do a long interview, but I sucked you in. Here we are. Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for sitting down with me and talking through all this stuff. I know Sounds like a lot of years of effort, and to rehash it all is probably not the most exciting thing for you.
It was actually really fun. It was cathartic. It felt great. I think that, I'm super happy to share and appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
reaching
Hopefully
out.
the first of many. Well,
All right.
thanks, everybody.